Morning. Try to get the camera set up. Do this the right way. How we doing today, brother? All right, I'm gonna let some more people wait. I'm gonna wait about 5 minutes, maybe less, and we'll get going. Hope everybody's doing all right. Saturday morning, 10 a.m. here in Georgia. I think it's already 85 degrees, or at least it feels that way. I'm doing good. Thanks for asking. Gotta get the coffee, energy drink, or something. Gotta get the day sparked up. Good morning. Everybody that's coming in, I know the numbers are kind of high right now, but once it gets going, the book gets playing, people will drop off. Don't worry if you drop off and got things to do. The book is hard to listen to straight through, but I only do one chapter at a time, so we're only going to do one chapter today. It takes about an hour and a half. Let's see. Actually, today's chapter is going to be chapter 2, the Fellowcraft degree, part 1.
Second degree, the Fellowcraft.
So,
in the ancient Orient, all religion was more or less a mystery, and there was no divorce from it of philosophy. The popular theology.
All right, so again, today's book is Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. All right, it was edited by Brother Arturo de Hoyos, who's a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Mason. It is an audio book, so what were Pike's future predictions? There weren't many future predictions. It's just his. The book covers just the dogma of the degrees from 1 to 32. So again, if you got questions during, you can throw them up there, and I'll try to keep note of them, and then I'll answer them when it's over. But if you do miss today's video, you can always catch it on my YouTube channel, which you can get in my link tree, which is on my profile. It's SC Mason 374. But again, we'll get started with morals and dogma. If you have questions, go ahead and throw them up. And like I said, I'll probably take a break about 30 minutes through. But without further ado, thank you for tuning in. And I hope you'll listen intently and with an open mind. All right, let's get started. Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike. Chapter 2, Second Degree, Fellowcraft.
Taking the multitude of allegories and symbols for realities, degenerated into a worship of the celestial luminaries, of imaginary deities with human feelings, passions, appetites, and lusts, of idols, stones, animals, reptiles. The onion was sacred to the Egyptians because its different layers were a symbol of the concentric heavenly spheres. Of course, the popular religion could not satisfy the deeper longings and thoughts, the loftier aspirations of the spirit, or the logic of reason. The first, therefore, was taught to the initiated in the mysteries. There, also, it was taught by symbols. The vagueness of symbolism, capable of many interpretations, reached what the palpable and conventional creed could not. Its indefiniteness acknowledged the abstruseness of the subject. It treated that mysterious subject mystically and endeavored to illustrate what it could not explain,
Thanks for the follow,
to excite an appropriate feeling if it could not develop an adequate idea, and to make the image a mere subordinate conveyance for the conception, which itself never became obvious or familiar.
Amy,
the nature of symbolism. Thus, the knowledge now imparted by books and letters was of old conveyed by symbols, and the priests invented or perpetuated a display of rites and exhibitions which were not only more attractive to the eye than words, but often more suggestive and more pregnant with meaning to the mind. Masonry, successor of the mysteries, still follows the ancient manner of teaching. Footnote. Although Freemasonry does not teach the doctrines of the ancient mysteries, it employs their dramatic and symbolical method of instruction. It is thus an imperfect image. Her ceremonies are like the ancient mystic shows, not the reading of an essay, but the opening of a problem requiring research and constituting philosophy the arch-expounder. Her symbols are the instruction she gives. The lectures are endeavors, often partial and one-sided, to interpret these symbols. He who would become an accomplished Mason must not be content merely to hear or even to understand the lectures. He must, aided by them, and they having, as it were, marked out the way for him, study, interpret, and develop these symbols for himself. Though Masonry is identical with the ancient mysteries, it is so only in this qualified sense, that it presents but an imperfect image of their brilliancy,
thanks for being here,
the ruins only of their grandeur, and a system that has experienced progressive alterations, the fruits of social events, political circumstances, and the ambitious imbecility of its improvers. Footnote. Notwithstanding the connection that so evidently exists between the ancient mysteries and the Freemasonry of our day,
thanks for the follow, John.
The latter should be considered an imitation rather than a continuation of those ancient mysteries. For initiation into them was the entering of a school wherein we are taught art, science, morals, law, philosophy, philanthropy, and the wonders and worship of nature, while the mysteries of Masonry are but a resume of divine and human wisdom and morality. That is to say, of all those perfections which, when practiced, bring man nearest to God. From Rebold, History of Freemasonry in Europe, 1868. After leaving Egypt, the mysteries were modified by the habits of the different nations among whom they were introduced, and especially by the religious systems of the countries into which they were transplanted. To maintain the established government, laws, and religion was the obligation of the initiate everywhere, and everywhere they were the heritage of the priests, who were nowhere willing to make the common people co-proprietors with themselves of philosophical truth. Masonry is not the Colosseum in ruins. It is rather a Roman palace of the Middle Ages, disfigured by modern architectural improvements, yet built on a Cyclopean foundation laid by the Etruscans, and with many a stone of the superstructure taken from dwellings and temples of the age of Hadrian and Antoninus. Footnote. Cyclopean foundation is a technical architectural term meaning formed with or containing large undressed stones. The name derives from the legend of the Gasterocorus, literally bellies with hands, 7 cyclops who earned their living as masons. They supposedly fortified the city of Tiryns for Perseus with massive walls formed from blocks so large that a mule team could not have stirred even the smallest from its place. Christianity taught the doctrine of fraternity, but repudiated that of political equality by continually inculcating obedience to Caesar and to those lawfully in authority. Masonry was the first apostle of equality. In a monastery, there is fraternity and equality, but no liberty. Masonry added that also, and claimed for man the threefold heritage: liberty, equality, and fraternity. It was but a development of the original purpose of the mysteries, which was to teach men to know and practice their duties to themselves and their fellows, the great practical end of all philosophy and all knowledge. Man is supreme over institutions. Truths are the springs from which duties flow, and it is but a few hundred years since a new truth began to be distinctly seen, that man is supreme over institutions, and not they over him. Man has natural empire over all institutions. They are for him according to his development, not he for them. This seems to us a very simple statement, one to which all men everywhere ought to assent. But once it was a great new truth, not revealed until governments had been in existence for at least 5,000 years.
I don't know about that. Never heard of
it. Once revealed, it imposed new duties on men. Man owed it to himself to be free. He owed it to his country to seek to give her freedom or maintain her in that possession. It made tyranny and usurpation the enemies of the human race. It created a general outlawry of despots and despotisms, temporal and spiritual. The sphere of duty was immensely enlarged. Patriotism had henceforth a new and wider meaning. Free government, free thought, free conscience, free speech. All these came to be inalienable rights, which those who had parted with them or been robbed of them, or whose ancestors had lost them, had the right summarily to retake. Unfortunately, as truths always become perverted into falsehoods, and are falsehoods when misapplied,
Thanks for the follow, Donna.
This truth became the gospel of anarchy soon after it was first preached. Masonry early comprehended this truth and recognized its own enlarged duties. Its symbols then came to have a wider meaning, but it also assumed the mask of stonemasonry and borrowed its working tools, and so was supplied with new and apt symbols. It aided in bringing about the French Revolution, disappeared with the Girondists, was born again with the restoration of order, and sustained Napoleon because, though emperor, he acknowledged the right of the people to select its rulers, and was at the head of a nation refusing to receive back its old kings. Footnote: Girondists, or as they were more commonly known, the Girondins, members of a political group which had an important role in the French Revolution. But, as was so often the case in those troubled times, they set sail into the wrong political wind, and the group's leaders were guillotined October 31st, 1793. He pleaded with saber, musket, and cannon the great cause of the people against royalty, the right of the French people even to make a Corsican general their emperor, if it pleased them. Footnote: the Corsican general refers to Napoleon. Masonry felt that this truth had the omnipotence of God on its side, and that neither pope nor potentate could overcome it. It was a truth dropped into the world's wide treasury, and forming a part of the heritage which each generation receives, enlarges, and holds in trust, and of necessity bequeaths to mankind, the personal estate of man, entailed of nature to the end of time. And Masonry early recognized it as true, that to set forth and develop a truth, or any human excellence of gift or growth, is to make greater the spiritual glory of the race. That whosoever aids the march of a truth and makes the thought a thing, writes in the same line with Moses, and with him who died upon the cross, and has an intellectual sympathy with the deity himself. The best gift we can bestow on man is manhood. It is that which Masonry is ordained of God to bestow on its votaries. Not sectarianism and religious dogma, not a rudimental morality that may be found in the writings of Confucius, Zoroaster, Seneca, and the rabbis, in the Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, not a little and cheap common school knowledge, but manhood and science and philosophy.
Thanks for the follow, guys.
Philosophy, science, and religion. Not that philosophy or science is in opposition to religion, for philosophy is but that knowledge of God and the soul which is derived from observation of the manifested action of God and the soul, and from a wise analogy. It is the intellectual guide which the religious sentiment needs. The true religious philosophy of an imperfect being is not a system of creed, but, as Socrates thought, an infinite search or approximation. Philosophy is that intellectual and moral progress which the religious sentiment inspires and ennobles. As to science, it could not walk alone while religion was stationary. It consists of those matured inferences from experience which all other experience confirms. It realizes and unites all that was truly valuable in both the old schemes of mediation, one heroic, or the system of action and effort, and the mystical theory of spiritual, contemplative communion. Listen to me, says Galen, as to the voice of the Eleusinian Hierophant, and believe that the study of nature is a mystery no less important than theirs, nor less adapted to display the wisdom and power of the great Creator. Their lessons and demonstrations were obscure, but ours are clear and unmistakable.
It is Masonic.
We deem that to be the best knowledge we can obtain of the soul of another man, which is furnished by his actions and his lifelong conduct. Evidence to the contrary, supplied by what another man informs us that this soul has said to his, would weigh little against the former. The first scriptures for the human race were written by God on the earth and heavens. Footnote. Regarding the term, the first scriptures, although we are accustomed to understanding Scripture as the inspired writings of Jewish and or Christian authors, collated as the Bible, the term has a much broader application. Many of the apocryphal and pseudepigraphical texts carried equal weight among early Christians, while the Gnostic writings, for example, Nag Hammadi texts, were deemed equally valid by others. To others still, the Quran or Zend-Avesta are expressions of the divine will. In any case, Pike's thesis, borrowed from Reverend Parker, is that creation presents the true handwriting of God, unmarred by human hands. Even as an artist is understood by his works, creation itself is the canvas of the Supreme Being, while science offers the tools by which we seek to understand the laws and workings of the material universe. The reading of these scriptures is science. Familiarity with the grass and trees, the insects and the infusoria, teaches us deeper lessons of love and faith than we can glean from the writings of Fenelon and Augustine. The great Bible of God is ever open before mankind. Knowledge is convertible into power, and axioms into rules of utility and duty. But knowledge itself is not power. Wisdom is power, and her prime minister is justice, which is the perfected law of truth. The purpose, therefore, of education and science is to make a man wise. If knowledge does not make him so, it is wasted, like water poured on the sands. To know the formulas of Masonry is of as little value by itself as to know so many words and sentences in some barbarous African or Australasian dialect. Footnote. Australasian is a geographical compound term referring to the island continent of Australia and several surrounding islands. To know even the meaning of the symbols is but little, unless that adds to our wisdom and also to our charity, which is to justice like one hemisphere of the brain to the other. Footnote. The point is well taken. It is not enough to know about Masonry or to understand its symbols on an intellectual level and to merely believe in being a good person. Freemasonry must tend to both self-improvement and helping mankind, or it has no practical value. This emulates the words of James chapter 2, verse 20. But wilt thou know, O vain man, that faith without works is dead? Do not lose sight, then, of the true object of your studies in Masonry. It is to add to your estate of wisdom, and not merely to your knowledge. A man may spend a lifetime in studying a single specialty of knowledge, botany, conchology, or entomology, for instance, in committing to memory names derived from the Greek and classifying and reclassifying. Footnote. Conchology is the scientific study and collection of seashells. Yet be no wiser than when he began. It is the great truths as to all that most concerns a man, as to his rights, interests, and duties, that Masonry seeks to teach her initiates.
Hey, what's up, brother?
Knowledge and liberty. The wiser a man becomes, the less will he be inclined to submit tamely to the imposition of fetters or a yoke on his conscience or his person. For by increase of wisdom he not only better knows his rights, but the more highly values them, and is more conscious of his worth and dignity. His pride then urges him to assert his independence. He becomes better able to assert it also, and better able to assist others or his country when they or she stake all, even existence, upon the same assertion. But mere knowledge makes no one independent, nor fits him to be free. It often only makes him a more useful slave. Liberty is a curse to the ignorant and brutal. Political science has for its object to ascertain in what manner and by means of what institutions political and personal freedom may be secured and perpetuated. Not license or the mere right of every man to vote, but entire and absolute freedom of thought and opinion, alike free of the despotism of monarch and mob and prelate, freedom of action within the limits of the general law enacted for all,
right,
the courts of justice with impartial judges and juries open to all alike, weakness and poverty equally potent in those courts as power and wealth, the avenues to office and honor open alike to all the worthy, the military powers in war or peace, in strict subordination to the civil power, arbitrary arrests for acts not known to the law as crimes, impossible, Romish inquisitions, star chambers, military commissions unknown. Footnote: the star chambers were originally a supplement to the regular court system used by Henry VIII to enforce laws when other courts were corrupted by political influence and bribery. Under Charles I, it was used to enforce unpopular policies.
I do this every
and became
Saturday.
a symbol of oppression to the Puritans who opposed the king, the means of instruction within reach of the children of all, the right of free speech, and accountability of all public officers, civil and military. If Masonry needed to be justified for imposing political as well as moral duties on its initiates, it would be enough to point to the sad history of the world. It would not even need that she should turn back the pages of history to the chapters written by Tacitus, that she should recite the incredible horrors of despotism under Caligula and Domitian, Caracalla and Commodus, Vitellius and Maximin. Footnote: Maximin was a Roman emperor, AD 235 to 38, who was rumored to have started life as a shepherd. Joining the army, his great strength attracted the attention of Emperor Septimus Severus. His short reign was undistinguished, except for industrious road repair in the Rhine region. Between his predecessor and Aurelius, AD 270, there were no less than 35 such brief emperors. Maximin only stands out by his reputation of having been 8 feet tall, with a thumb of such size he could wear his wife's bracelet on it as a ring. She need only point to the centuries of calamity through which the gay French nation passed, to the long oppression of the feudal ages of the selfish Bourbon kings, to those times when the peasants were robbed and slaughtered by their own lords and princes like sheep, when the lord claimed the first fruits of the peasant's marriage bed, when the captured city was given up to merciless rape and massacre, when the state prisons groaned with innocent victims, and the church blessed the banners of pitiless murderers and sang Te Deums for the crowning mercy of the eve of St. Bartholomew. We might turn over the pages to a later chapter, that of the reign of the 15th Louis, when young girls, hardly more than children, were kidnapped to serve his lusts. When lettres de cachet filled the Bastille with persons accused of no crime, with husbands who were in the way of the pleasures of lascivious wives, and of villains wearing orders of nobility. When the people were ground between the upper and the nether millstone of taxes, customs, and excises. And when the Pope's nuncio and the Cardinal de la Roche-Aymon, devoutly kneeling, one on each side of Madame du Barry, the king's abandoned prostitute, put the slippers on her naked feet as she rose from the adulterous bed. Then, indeed, suffering and toil were the two forms of man, and the people were but beasts of burden. Footnote: a nuncio is a permanent diplomatic representative of the Roman Catholic Pope at a foreign court. The point is that the Church was willing to tolerate, even assist in, the immorality of the French royalty on the eve of the French Revolution. The true Mason is he who labors strenuously to help his order effect its great purposes. Not that the order can effect them by itself, but that it too can help. It also is one of God's instruments. It is a force and a power, and shame upon it if it did not exert itself and, if need be, sacrifice its children in the cause of humanity, as Abraham was ready to offer up Isaac on the altar of sacrifice. It will not forget that noble allegory of courteous leaping, all in armor, into the great yawning gulf that opened to swallow Rome. It will try. It shall not be its fault if the day never comes when man will no longer have to fear a conquest, an invasion, a usurpation, a rivalry of nations with the armed hand, an interruption of civilization depending on a marriage royal or a birth in the hereditary tyrannies, a partition of the peoples by a congress, a dismemberment by the downfall of a dynasty, a combat of two religions meeting head to head like two goats of darkness on the bridge of the infinite, when they will no longer have to fear famine, spoliation, prostitution from distress, misery from lack of work, and all the brigandages of chance in the forest of events. When nations will gravitate about the truth like stars about the light, each in its own orbit, without clashing or collision. And everywhere freedom, tinctured with stars, crowned with the celestial splendors, and with wisdom and justice on either hand, will reign supreme.
Yeah, thanks for the follow, Nathan.
Reason, love, and faith. In your studies as a Fellowcraft, you must be guided by reason, love, and faith. We do not now discuss the differences between reason and faith and undertake to define the domain of each. But it is necessary to say that even in the ordinary affairs of life, we are governed far more by what we believe than by what we know, by faith and analogy than by reason. The age of reason of the French Revolution taught, we know, what a folly it is to enthrone reason by itself as supreme. Reason is at fault when it deals with the infinite. There we must revere and believe. Notwithstanding the calamities of the virtuous, the miseries of the deserving, the prosperity of tyrants, and the murder of martyrs, we must believe there is a wise, just, merciful, and loving God, an intelligence and a providence supreme over all,
Brother Tom, thanks for being
and
here.
caring for the
Swim, thanks for
minutest
being here.
things and events. A faith is a necessity to man. Woe to him who believes nothing. We believe that the soul of another is of a certain nature and possesses certain qualities, that he is generous and honest, or penurious and knavish, that she is virtuous and amiable, or vicious and ill-tempered, from the countenance alone, from little more than a glimpse of it, without the means of knowing. We venture our fortune on the signature of a man on the other side of the world, whom we never saw, upon the belief that he is honest and
Thanks for the follow,
trustworthy.
Elias.
We believe that occurrences have taken place upon the assertion of others. We believe that one will act upon another, and in the reality of a multitude of other phenomena that reason cannot explain. But we ought not to believe what reason authoritatively denies, that at which the sense of right revolts, that which is absurd or self-contradictory, or at issue with experience or science, or that which degrades the character of the deity and would make him revengeful, malignant, cruel, or unjust. A man's faith is as much his own as his reason is. His freedom consists as much in his faith being free as in his will being uncontrolled by power. All the priests and augurs of Rome or Greece had not the right to require Cicero or Socrates to believe in the absurd mythology of the vulgar. All the imams of Mohammedanism have not the right to require a pagan to believe that Gabriel dictated the Quran to the prophet. Footnote: Imams is a term used only by particular adherents of the Shiite sect of Islam to denote their religious leaders. The use here infers that Islam has a priesthood, which it does not. This does not, however, detract from the point, the basic imperative of religious tolerance. All the Brahmins that ever lived, if assembled in one conclave like the cardinals, could not gain a right to compel a single human being to believe in the Hindu cosmogony. No man or body of men can be infallible and authorized to decide what other men shall believe, as to any tenet of faith. Except to those who first receive it, every religion and the truth of all inspired writings depend on human testimony and internal evidences to be judged of by reason and the wise analogies of faith. Each man must necessarily have the right to judge of their truth for himself, because no one man can have any higher or better right to judge than another of equal information and intelligence. Domitian claimed to be the Lord God, and statues and images of him in silver and gold were found throughout the known world. He claimed to be regarded as the God of all men, and according to Suetonius, began his letters thus: "Our Lord and God commands that it should be done so and so," and formally decreed that no one should address him otherwise, either in writing or by word of mouth. Palfurius Sura, the philosopher, who was his chief delator, accusing those who refused to recognize his divinity, however much he may have believed in that divinity, had not the right to demand that a single Christian in Rome or the provinces should do the same. Reason is far from being the only guide in morals or in political science. Love or loving kindness must keep it company, to exclude fanaticism, intolerance, and persecution, to all of which a morality too ascetic and extreme political principles invariably lead. We must also have faith in ourselves and in our fellows and the people, or we shall be easily discouraged by reverses and our ardor cooled by obstacles. We must not listen to reason alone. Force comes more from faith and love, and it is by the aid of these that man scales the loftiest heights of morality or becomes the savior and redeemer of a people. Reason must hold the helm, but these supply the motive power. They are the wings of the soul. Enthusiasm is generally unreasoning, and without it, and love and faith, there would have been no Rienzi, or Tell, or Sidney, or any other of the great patriots whose names are immortal. Footnote: Nicholas Rienzi Gabrini. Of humble birth but noble sentiment, Gibbon admired him greatly and called his eloquence, quote, prompt and persuasive. In his vision of a just Roman domain, his reach exceeded his grasp. Pride and power brought him to the great level of history, where, quote, in the pride of victory, he forfeited what yet remained of his civil virtues, without acquiring the fame of military prowess, unquote. And thus Gabrini fell to the mob and the assassins. Quote, posterity will compare the virtues and failings of this extraordinary man, but in a long period of anarchy and servitude, the name of Rienzi has often been celebrated as the deliverer of his country and the last of the Roman patriots, unquote. All quotes are from Gibbon. Footnote: William Tell was a Swiss hero who has come to symbolize the struggle for political and individual freedom. His actual existence is something.
Okay, well, on the level, the galaxy, the hearts, that's so. Swin, thank you. You guys are gonna kill me with this. I appreciate it. I just know it's all going back to everybody else. It's all going back, brothers. Thank you so much. I'll spin here. Wow, incredible, man. Thank you, Swin.
But as a legend,
absolute legend. If you guys would please give Swin and On the Level, these brothers, some support.
Feat of marksmanship has many parallels in
absolute
European
legends, man.
mythology.
You guys are incredible. Thank you so much.
If the deity had been merely and only all-wise and almighty, he would never have created the universe.
Wow.
Genius and power. It is genius that gets power, and its prime lieutenants are force and wisdom. The unruliest of men bend before the leader that has the sense to see and the will to do. It is genius that rules with godlike power, that unveils with its counselors the hidden human mysteries, cuts asunder with its word the huge knots, and builds up with its word the crumbled ruins. At its glance fall down the senseless idols whose altars have been on all the high places and in all the sacred groves. Dishonesty and imbecility stand abashed before it. Its single yea or nay revokes the wrongs of ages and is heard among the future generations. Its power is immense because its wisdom is immense. Genius is the sun of the political sphere. Force and wisdom, its ministers, are the orbs that carry its light into darkness and answer it with their solid, reflecting truth. Development is symbolized by the use of the mallet and chisel, the development of the energies and intellect of the individual and the people. Footnote: the chisel and mallet are the working tools of the York-Rite degree of Mark Master Mason, and are thus explained by authors Cheval and Gould in Guide to the Royal Arch Chapter, 1867. The chisel is an instrument made use of by operative masons to cut, carve, mark, and indent their work. It morally demonstrates the advantages of discipline and education. The mind, like the diamond in its original state, is rude and unpolished, but as the effect of the chisel on the external coat soon presents to view the latent beauties of the diamond, so education discovers the latent beauties of the mind and draws them forth to range the large field of matter and space, to display the summit of human knowledge, our duty to God and man. The mallet is an instrument made use of by operative masons to knock off excrescences and smooth surfaces. It morally teaches to correct irregularities and to reduce man to a proper level, so that by quiet deportment he may, in the school of discipline, learn to be content. What the mallet is to the workman, enlightened reason is to the passions. It curbs ambition, it depresses envy, it moderates anger, and it encourages good dispositions. Genius may place itself at the head of an unintellectual, uneducated, unenergetic nation. But in a free country, to cultivate the intellect of those who elect is the only mode of securing intellect and genius for rulers. The world is seldom ruled by the great spirits, except after dissolution and new birth. In periods of transition and convulsion, the long parliaments, the Robespierres and Marats, and the semi-respectabilities of intellect too often hold the reins of power. The Cromwells and Napoleons come later. After Marius and Sulla and Cicero, the rhetorician, Caesar. Footnote: Gaius Marius was the uncle of Julius Caesar. He was a competent general, but an undistinguished politician. The great intellect is often too sharp for the granite of this life. Legislators may be very ordinary men, for legislation is very ordinary work. It is but the final issue of a million minds. The power of the purse or the sword compared to that of the spirit is poor and contemptible. As to lands, you may have agrarian laws and equal partition, but a man's intellect is all his own, held direct from God, an inalienable fief. It is the most potent of weapons in the hands of a paladin. Footnote: paladin is another word for a knight. If the people comprehend force in the physical sense, how much more do they reverence the intellectual? Ask Hildebrand or Luther or Loyola.
Thanks for the follow, Richard.
Footnote: born around 1025 A.D., Hildebrand was originally a monk who was given minor orders by Pope Leo IX. He later proved to be a wise counselor for Alexander II, another pope, whom he succeeded to the throne of Peter as Pope Gregory VII. His reign is generally regarded as one of the high water marks of the papacy, but it is doubtful he would have appreciated being associated with Martin Luther. Footnote: St. Ignatius Loyola, 1491 to 1556. He was a Spanish soldier and ecclesiastic, founder of the Society of Jesus, commonly called the Jesuits. They fall prostrate before it as before an idol. The mastery of mind over mind is the only conquest worth having. The other injures both and dissolves at a breath. Rude as it is, the great cable falls down and snaps at last. But this dimly resembles the dominion of the Creator. It does not need a subject like that of Peter the Hermit. If the stream be but bright and strong, it will sweep like a spring tide to the popular heart. Not in word only, but in intellectual act lies the fascination. It is the homage to the invisible. This power, knotted with love, is the golden chain let down into the well of truth, or the invisible chain that binds the ranks of mankind together. Influence of man over man is a law of nature, whether it be by a great estate in land or in intellect. It may mean slavery, a deference to the eminent human judgment. Society hangs spiritually together like the revolving spheres above. The free country in which intellect and genius govern will endure. Where they serve and other influences govern, the national life is short. All the nations that have tried to govern themselves by their smallest, by the incapables or merely respectables, have come to naught. Constitutions and laws without genius and intellect to govern will not prevent decay. In that case, they have the dry rot, and the life dies out of them by degrees. To give a nation the franchise of the intellect is the only sure mode of perpetuating freedom. This will compel exertion and generous care for the people from those on the higher seats, and honorable and intelligent allegiance from those below. Then political public life will protect all men from self-abasement in sensual pursuits, from vulgar acts and low greed, by giving the noble ambition of just imperial rule. To elevate the people by teaching loving kindness and wisdom with
Lena.
Power to him who teaches best,
Thanks for the follow.
And so to develop the free state from the rough ashlar. This is the great labor in which Masonry desires to lend a helping hand. All of us should labor in building up the great monument of a nation, the holy house of the temple. The cardinal virtues must not be partitioned among men, becoming the exclusive property of some, like the common crafts. All are apprenticed to the partner's duty and honor. Masonry, a march and struggle toward the light. Masonry is a march and a struggle toward the light. For the individual as well as the nation, light is virtue, manliness, intelligence, liberty. Tyranny over the soul or body is darkness. The freest people, like the freest man, is always in danger of relapsing into servitude. Wars are almost always fatal to republics. They create tyrants and consolidate their power. They spring for the most part from evil counsels. When the small and the base are entrusted with power, legislation and administration become but two parallel series of errors and blunders, ending in war, calamity, and a necessity for a tyrant. When the nation feels its feet sliding backward as if it walked on the ice, the time has come for a supreme effort. The magnificent tyrants of the past are but the types of those of the future. Men and nations will always sell themselves into slavery to gratify their passions and obtain revenge. The tyrant's plea, necessity, is always available, and the tyrant, once in power, the necessity of providing for his safety makes him savage. Religion is a power, and he must control that. Independent, its sanctuaries might rebel. Then it becomes unlawful for the people to worship God in their own way, and the old spiritual despotisms revive. Men must believe as power wills or die. And even if they may believe as they will, all they have, lands, houses, body, and soul, are stamped with the royal brand. I am the state, said Louis XIV to his peasants. The very shirts on your backs are mine, and I can take them if I will. And dynasties so established endure, like that of the Caesars of Rome, of the Caesars of Constantinople, of the Caliphs, the Stuarts, the Spaniards, the Goths, the Valois, until the race wears out and ends with lunatics and idiots who still rule. There is no concord among men to end the horrible bondage. The state falls inwardly, as well as by the outward blows of the incoherent elements. The furious human passions, the sleeping human indolence, the stolid human ignorance, the rivalry of human castes are as good for the kings as the swords of the paladins. The worshippers have all bowed so long to the old idol that they cannot go into the streets and choose another Grand Lama. Footnote: Grand Lama. The Dalai Lama, the the religious leader of Tibetan Buddhism. And so the effete state floats on down the puddled stream of time until the tempest or the tidal sea discovers that the worm has consumed its strength, and it crumbles into oblivion. Freedom, persecution, and despotism. Civil and religious freedom must go hand in hand, and persecution matures them both. A people content with the thoughts made for them by the priests of a church will be content with royalty by divine right, the church and the throne mutually sustaining each other. They will smother schism and reap infidelity and indifference. And while the battle for freedom goes on around them, they will only sink the more apathetically into servitude and a deep trance, perhaps occasionally interrupted by furious fits of frenzy, followed by helpless exhaustion. Despotism is not difficult in any land that has only known one master from its childhood. But there is no harder problem than to perfect and perpetuate free government by the people themselves. For it is not one king that is needed. All must be kings. It is easy to set up Masaniello, that in a few days he may fall lower than before. Footnote: Masaniello, 1620 to 47. This poor Italian fisherman might have plied his trade for many years had he not been chosen to lead the planning of demonstrations against the imposition of a tax on fruit by Spain. The demonstrations led to a revolt, and many nobles were killed. Masaniello was soon drunk with both power and wine, and was hastily dispatched. The point is that freedom is easier to achieve than responsibility, but an equally appropriate lesson from the life of Masaniello is the transitory character of the allegiance of a mob. But free government grows slowly like the individual human faculties, and like the forest trees from the inner heart outward. Liberty is not only the common birthright, but it is lost as well by non-user as by misuser. It depends far more on the universal effort than any other human property. It has no single shrine or holy well of pilgrimage for the nation, for its waters should burst out freely from the whole soil. The free popular power is one that is only known in its strength in the hour of adversity, for all its trials, sacrifices, and expectations are its own. It is trained to think for itself and also to act for itself. When the enslaved people prostrate themselves in the dust before the hurricane, like the alarmed beasts of the field, the free people stand erect before it in all the strength of unity, in self-reliance, in mutual reliance, with effrontery against all but the visible hand of God. It is neither cast down by calamity, nor elated by success. This vast power of endurance, of forbearance, of patience, and of performance is only acquired by continual exercise of all the functions, like the healthful physical human vigor, like the individual moral vigor. And the maxim is no less true than old, that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. It is curious to observe the universal pretext by which the tyrants of all times take away the national liberties. It is stated in the statutes of Edward II that the justices and the sheriff should no longer be elected by the people on account of the riots and dissensions which had arisen. Footnote: Edward II was King of England from 1307 to 1327. He is called a tyrant because he resisted sharing power with the barons. He was murdered at the instigation of his wife, Isabella of France, and her English baronial paramour. The same reason was given long before for the suppression of popular elections. The same method that the French astronomers measured a degree of latitude and so established a scale of measures on an immutable basis. Though it is by means of the immense triangle that has for its base a line drawn in imagination between the place of the earth now and its place 6 months hence in space, and for its apex a planet or star, that the distance of Jupiter or Sirius from the earth is ascertained. And though there is a triangle still more vast, its base extending either way from us, with and past the horizon into immensity, and its apex infinitely distant above us, to which corresponds a similar infinite triangle below, what is above equaling what is below, immensity equaling immensity. Footnote. This alludes to the famous Hermetic axiom found in the Emerald Tablet. That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below. For more on this, see Arturo de Hoyos, Albert Pike's Esoterica. Yet the science of numbers, to which Pythagoras attached so much importance, and whose mysteries are found everywhere in the ancient religions, and most of all in the Kabbalah and in the Bible, is not sufficiently expressed by either the word geometry or the word trigonometry. For that science includes these with arithmetic, and also with algebra, logarithms, the integral and differential calculus, and by means of it are worked out the great problems of astronomy or the laws of the stars. Virtue is but heroic bravery, to do the thing thought to be true in spite of all enemies of flesh or spirit, in despite of all temptations or menaces. Man is accountable for the uprightness of his doctrine, but not for the rightness of it. Devout enthusiasm is far easier than a good action. The end of thought is action. The sole purpose of religion is an ethic. Theory in political science is worthless, except for the purpose of being realized in practice. In every credo, religious or political, as in the soul of man, there are two regions, the dialectic and the ethic. And it is only when the two are harmoniously blended that a perfect discipline is evolved. Footnote. Dialectic is a formal system of reasoning or thought which begins in the process of drawing rigorous distinctions. The method reveals contradictions in thinking, often not revealed by other processes. In this case, however, this term is being used as a synonym for religious doctrine. Plato considered it to be the art of division into classes. The word derives from the Greek and means discourse or debate. There are men who dialectically are Christians, as there are a multitude who dialectically are Masons, and yet who are ethically infidels, as these are ethically of the profane in the strictest sense. Intellectual believers, but practical atheists. Men who will write you evidences in perfect faith in their logic, but cannot carry out the Christian or Masonic doctrine owing to the strength or weakness of the flesh. On the other hand, there are many dialectical skeptics, but ethical believers, as there are many Masons who have never undergone initiation. And as ethics are the end and purpose of religion, so are ethical believers the most worthy. He who does right is better than he who thinks right. But you must not act upon the hypothesis that all men are hypocrites, whose conduct does not square with their sentiments. No vice is more rare, for no task is more difficult than systematic hypocrisy. When the demagogue becomes a usurper, it does not follow that he was all the time a hypocrite. Shallow men only so judge of others. The truth is that creed has, in general, very little influence on the conduct. In religion, on that of the individual. In politics, on that of party. As a general thing, the Mohammedan, in the Orient, is far more honest and trustworthy than the Christian. Footnote. Mahometan is another term for a person who is Muslim. A gospel of love in the mouth is an avatar of persecution in the heart. Men who believe in eternal damnation and a literal sea of fire and brimstone incur the certainty of it, according to their creed, on the slightest temptation of appetite or passion. Predestination insists on the necessity of good works. In Masonry, at the least flow of passion, one speaks ill of another behind his back. And so far from the brotherhood of blue Masonry being real and the solemn pledges contained in the use of the word brother being complied with, extraordinary pains are taken to show that Masonry is a sort of abstraction which scorns to interfere in worldly matters. The rule may be regarded as universal, that, where there is a choice to be made, a Mason will give his vote and influence in politics and business to the less qualified profane in preference to the better qualified Mason. One will take an oath to oppose any unlawful usurpation of power, and then become the ready and even eager instrument of a usurper. Another will call one brother, and then play toward him the part of Judas Iscariot, or strike him as Joab did Abner under the fifth rib, with a lie whose authorship is not to be traced. Footnote: Joab was a Jewish military leader for King David. Of a particularly ruthless nature, he killed Absalom after David ordered him spared and exacted a blood revenge on Abner, who had killed his brother. Footnote: Abner was an Old Testament character who was the chief of Saul's army. He elected to follow one of Saul's sons rather than David after the death of Saul. This reference is to Abner's death at the hand of Joab, a revenge killing for Abner having slain Joab's brother. See 2 Samuel, chapters 2, 3, and 4. Masonry does not change human nature and cannot make honest men out of born knaves. While you are still engaged in preparation and in accumulating principles for future use, do not forget the words of the Apostle James. For if any be a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like unto a man beholding his natural face in a glass. For he beholdeth himself, and goeth away, and straightway forgetteth what manner of man he was. But whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty, and continueth, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed
Angela,
in his
thanks
work.
for the share. Jose,
If any man among you seem to be religious, and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is vain. Faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being an abstraction.
Okay, so there's 6 minutes left in the chapter. At the end of the 6 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and pause it, and then I'll basically give it a second because this video does get uploaded to my YouTube channel, which you can find in my link tree. So if you ever miss a chapter, you can always find it there. So again, there's only 6 minutes left. Each chapter runs about an hour, hour and a half sometimes. So after this, I'm going to actually shut down this portion because this is the audiobook part. And then I'm gonna come back live like maybe 2 minutes right after that. And then if whoever was in this live wants to come back and talk about what they heard, I'll be available. And if not, we'll just talk Freemasonry, whatever you guys want to talk about. All right. So again, 6 minutes left in the chapter. If you've been here the whole time, thank you so much. Those that have liked the live, shared the live, sent gifts, you guys are blessings beyond what I deserve. I'm just happy that you guys came in and you sat down and you listened with an open mind. That's all I ask for. Anytime I play anything, I just ask that you listen with an open mind and jot down questions if you have them. So again, 6 minutes left. I'm going to let it play. And again, thank you for all the likes, all the shares, all the follows, all the gifts. You guys are incredible. Again, thanks for being here. Let's listen to the last 6 minutes.
A man is justified by works and not by faith only. The devils believe and tremble. As the body without the heart is dead, so is faith without works. In political science also, free governments are erected and free constitutions framed upon some simple and intelligible theory. Upon whatever theory they are based, no sound conclusion is to be reached except by carrying the theory out without flinching, both in argument on constitutional questions and in practice. Shrink from the true theory through timidity, or wander from it through want of the logical faculty, or transgress against it through passion, or on the plea of necessity or expediency, and you have denial or invasion of rights, laws that offend against first principles, usurpation of illegal powers, or abnegation and abdication of legitimate authority. Do not forget either that as the showy, superficial, impudent, and self-conceited will almost always be preferred, even in utmost stress of danger and calamity of the state, to the man of solid learning, large intellect, and Catholic sympathies, because he is nearer the common, popular, and legislative levels, so the highest truth is not acceptable to the mass of mankind. When Solon was asked if he had given his countrymen the best laws, he answered, "The best they are capable of receiving." This is one of the profoundest utterances on record, and yet, like all great truths, so simple as to be rarely comprehended. It contains the whole philosophy of history. It utters a truth which, had it been recognized, would have saved men an immensity of vain, idle disputes, and have led them into the clearer paths of knowledge in the past. It means this, that all truths are truths of period, and not truths for eternity. That whatever great fact has had strength and vitality enough to make itself real, whether of religion, morals, government, or of whatever else, and to find place in this world, has been a truth for the time, and as good as men were capable of receiving. So too with great men. The intellect and capacity of a people has a single measure, that of the great men whom Providence gives it and whom it receives.
Thanks for the follow, Freddie.
There have always been men too great for their time or their people. Every people makes such men only its idols, as it is capable of comprehending. To impose ideal truth or law upon an incapable and merely real man must ever be a vain and empty speculation. The laws of sympathy govern in this as they do in regard to men who are put at the head. We do not know as yet what qualifications the sheep insist on in a leader. With men who are too high intellectually, the mass have as little sympathy as they have with the stars. When Burke, the wisest statesman England ever had, rose to speak, the House of Commons was depopulated as upon an agreed signal. There is as little sympathy between the mass and the highest truths. The highest truth being incomprehensible to the man of realities, as the highest man is, and largely above his level, will be a great unreality and falsehood to an unintellectual man. The profoundest doctrines of Christianity and philosophy would be mere jargon and babble to a Potawatomi Indian. Popular explanations of the symbols of Masonry are fitting for the multitude that have swarmed into the temples, being fully up to the level of their capacity. Catholicism was a vital truth in its earliest ages, but it became obsolete, and Protestantism arose, flourished, and deteriorated. The doctrines of Zoroaster were the best which the ancient Persians were fitted to receive. Those of Confucius were fitted for the Chinese, those of Mohammed for the idolatrous Arabs of his age. Each was truth for the time. Each was a gospel preached by a reformer. And if any men are so little fortunate as to remain content therewith, when others have attained a higher truth, it is their misfortune and not their fault. They are to be pitied for it and not persecuted. Of man and the truth. Do not expect easily to convince men of the truth or to lead them to think aright. The subtle human intellect can weave its mists over even the clearest vision. Remember that it is eccentric enough to ask unanimity from a jury, but to ask it from any large number of men on any point of political faith is amazing. You can hardly get two men in any Congress or convention to agree. Nay, you can rarely get one to agree with himself. The political church, which chances to be supreme anywhere, has an indefinite number of tongues. How then can we expect men to agree as to matters beyond the cognizance of the senses? How can we compass the infinite and the invisible with any chain of evidence? Ask the small sea waves what they murmur among the pebbles. How many of those words that come from the invisible shore are lost, like the birds in the long passage? How vainly do we strain the eyes across the long infinite? We must be content, as the children are, with the pebbles that have been stranded, since it is forbidden us to explore the hidden depths.
Okay, that's it for part one of the second degree. I'm going to go ahead and end this live here just a minute. And again, I'm going to be going right back live. So if you're in here and you want to actually talk about this, or heck, if you just want to talk about Freemasonry or you want to try and troll the page or whatever, just give me a couple minutes. I'm just going to get something to drink and then I'll be right back. But for everybody that's been here, that stayed for the whole thing, we started with like 600 people and I knew it wouldn't last. I expected maybe 10, but we maintained 40, 50 people the whole time. So I'm really curious as for those that have stayed around and listened, what you were able to glean from that chapter. Let's talk about it. So give me a couple minutes and I'll be right back. Again, thanks for being here for Chapter 2, Part 1 of the Second Degree, the Fellowcraft of Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. Read to you by Arturo de Hoyos, 33rd degree Scottish Rite.